I'm Chris Tinsley. I'm a student here at Sloan, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's panel, Tackling Name, Image, and Likeness in College Sports. On today's panel, we have Jerry Cardinal, founder of Redbird Capital Partners, Saquon Barkley, running back for the New York Giants, Stan Wilcox, executive vice president at the NCAA, and Martin Jarman, athletic director at Boston College. Moderating today's panel is Warren Zola, executive director of the Boston College Chief Executives Club. This panel will run for approximately 55 minutes and will include 10 minutes of audience Q&A. You can submit questions via Twitter using the hashtag likeness. With that, I'll leave it to Warren.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us today. The obligatory thank you to the students at MIT, Jess, Daryl, and the entire organizing committee. It's a fantastic event. I know how hard these are to pull off, and so kudos to you, and hopefully we'll bring some education on the future of college athletics and name, image, and likeness, and I'm thrilled to be joined by such a great panel. It's clear that the landscape within college athletics has changed dramatically in the past 10 years and continues to change. There have been major reforms that have happened and that continue to happen, both on the student side as well as on the revenue side. Name, image, and likeness is an issue that has been in front of the NCAA and college athletics for quite some time, and various states now have begun to pass legislation. There's somewhere between 30 and 40 states that have given thought to passing legislation that would provide the rights to name, image, and likeness to college athletes under the NCAA umbrella moving forward. California has passed a law that takes effect in 2023. Florida has passed legislation that either takes place this fall or pending some decisions at the state government potentially a year from now. Clearly, name, image, and likeness is coming to college athletics. It's going to change a whole lot of how this industry is run, both from the NCAA's perspective and from the college athletes themselves. And we're going to take a look, not at the past, but where we think these trends are going, what college athletics will look like in the future, what the ramifications are to both the students and to college athletics. And the last thing I'll mention before we get going, college athletics is an incredibly valuable part of an educational system. The mission of institutions is to provide all sorts of learning experiences that are transformational, that cannot occur in the classroom. And college athletics plays a big role of that. And so remembering to tether education as part of their experiences moving forward will be something that everyone's going to have to grapple with and understand. So let me start with some basic questions in terms of you all come from very different perspectives. What are some of the biggest challenges that you see facing the industry in integrating this concept of name, image, and likeness under the present scenario of states passing legislation, the NCAA considering how to change and evaluate and understand and protect its students? I guess I'll start with Stan. You are the NCAA. Welcome. Sure. You are representing the members of the NCAA and have a whole lot of different constituents from Division I on down to Division III, and it will impact differently across the board.
Sure. And just to start off with, I guess I've been a member of the NCAA from very different sides as a student athlete, and then as a starting administrator at the NCAA, then in a conference office at the Big East Conference for several years, and then to my alma mater as an administrator, and then on to Duke as an administrator, and then as an athletics director at Florida State for 5 years. And now, go Noles. And then back to the NCAA as a executive vice president. So I've seen and understand how the NCAA works from the inside out, being on all those different sides. And I'd say the most critical and difficult thing is when you have over 1,000 institutions that are collectively coming together to determine how they want to run collegiate athletics. It's always a very difficult thing to get everybody to understand and move in the right direction. So the biggest thing and the biggest hurdles that we run into all the time is, number one, the education of the membership and understanding that we are not doing away with our principles, all the guidelines that we have and hold true to as far as what it means about college athletics and a college athletics experience for student athletes. But we're changing with the times, and we have to always look at our rules and regulations and figure out how do we modify those rules and regulations so that it does change with the time. The times right now is really critical because, particularly in the social media space, when you have prospective student athletes who are coming in with brands that they've already built, whether that's on Facebook, whether that's on YouTube, whether that's on Instagram, and they're building a following where they're hitting targets where sponsors want to put sponsorships on their pages, advertising, etc. And those things are things that every human being, every person ought to have the ability to take advantage of. So just like the regular student at an institution, we want to treat our student athletes the same. And so it's just a matter of now figuring out how we modify our regulations so that it accommodates that, and it accommodates that within the collegiate model. And we're going to get there. We're definitely on the track. I think we're now at a point where our membership totally understands it a little better and has all agreed, yes, we're going to make changes in this area. Now we're just at the point of, well, how far are we going to go?
And I think one of the statements that you made actually needs to be underscored for you to say, we recognize that these students should have the same rights as the other students. And that's not always been the same message that the NCAA has come out with, right? And so that's a shift.
Yeah, and what generally is that causes that is because collegiate athletics is not like your other athletics organizations, your professional organizations, where they have a draft and you're drafted to a particular team and that team owns you. Mm-hmm. In collegiate athletics, we have a recruiting model so that student athletes, prospective student athletes, are recruited and given an opportunity to determine what institution they would like to attend. And so we're always trying to protect our recruiting model. Even though there are, everybody knows that there are violations that go on in that area. If you look at the most violations that we have in our industry, it's generally in the area of recruiting. But that's unique to college athletics, and that's something that the membership wants to maintain, and that's the very, very tricky thing for us to be able to maintain while also making things a lot more liberal.
And I'll come back to competitive balance at the college landscape in a second. Jerry, I want to turn to you. You have started One Team. And for those who don't understand sort of the purpose of that, you're coming from, again, a different perspective from the pros side. Tell us a little bit about One Team and what some of these changes at the college level are going to mean to what you guys are trying to do as a business model.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we sort of started our entry into this whole dialogue was from the professional level. And it just dovetailed timing-wise with what's going on in college. But, for me, I mean, I've spent 25 years investing around professional sports. And, the premise that has worked very well for us over 25 years is to take capital like we have and partner with rights holders and create terminal value businesses in that partnership. That's a win-win. It's a win-win for the rights holder. It's a win-win for the capital. And we're constantly re-underwriting our perspective on sports. And so the one thing I would say when you get into this discussion is you really got to step back and say to yourself, well, what's the value chain here and what's the entry point? I started my career on the media side, creating the S Network. We then went to the infrastructure side with Legends Hospitality. We then went to the live event itself with on-location experiences with the NFL and the Super Bowl. And now we came to the players. And it's fascinating to me that it took me 25 years to bring capital to labor. Mm-hmm. Right? It's never happened before. Now, why is that? And the thing is that, this discussion that we're having here on this panel, it immediately jumps into a very micro discussion on name, image, and likeness. I actually step back and I say, well, wait a minute. There actually is an inherent partnership here between the teams and the leagues and the players. They can't have a game without either of them. And what's happened is when you step back and you look at the value chain in sports, you've got the teams in the leagues and you've got the players, and it seems like the teams in the leagues have evolved and they've had capital supporting them, and the 1/3 of the value chain hasn't evolved as much from a business standpoint. Now you have the overlay in the professional side, you have the overlay of the collective bargaining discussions and all of that stuff. But if you step out and you pull out the economics, the business of sports, what you realize is that there's a starting point here that should precede the discussion on name, image, and likeness, which is that there's an inherent alignment and partnership. What I found on the pro side, which I'm hoping we can actually be helpful in the college discussion with, is that there is actually a very tangible, actionable, and a very receptive audience on both the owner and league and team side and the player side to find areas where they can partner together. So that together, there's this notion that also precedes name, image, and likeness, that it's a zero-sum pie. And one of our premises on the pro side is I don't think it is a zero-sum pie. I actually think you can make the pie greater. You can add to it incrementally. And the only way you're going to do that, though, is if the three parts of the value chain come together. It's anti-Darwinian to have 2/3 prospering with capital and 1/3 not. And that's not a political statement. That's just sort of good business. And so if we can rise this up a bit and we can, and capital can be the lubricant that sort of puts these guys together more. And again, I'm saying all of this not naively, that there isn't obviously CBA discussions, all that other kind of stuff. I'm saying if you can do this part of it, you can raise the pie for everybody. And the question I have in my mind, as I'm just starting to turn my eyes to college, is that paradigm also applicable to the college environment?
So, Saquon, there's been this tension between sort of education and commercialism within college athletics over the years, right? There's no doubt that college athletics is a big business. Multi-billions a year are coming through, not to everybody, but it's being generated. The changes in how we consume media, the media rights deals, everything. At what point during your career did you realize the revenue is being generated from the players and that college athletics had put some type of a cap on your ability to capitalize upon your brand as an athlete?
Yeah, I would say it probably took to my sophomore year. When you're a freshman, that's kind of not really going on your mind. You're worrying about getting to class on time and trying to make it on the team and play well for your team. But as it got to my sophomore year, I started having a lot more success. And like you said, when you say your brand, you could see your Instagram following, you could see yourself on TV commercials, you could see yourself on ads on an ESPN game, and you see that your brand has grew tremendously. So I would say it took me to my sophomore year to realize it, but then actually get a true understanding of it. My junior year, I was having a very great junior season.
Yep.
Kind of halfway through the season, probably one of the Heisman's guys. I think I finished like 4th or 3rd. But when you see that and you kind of have that mindset that you know that you're going to the next level and you're going to go to the NFL, those things kind of come to your mind. And obviously, I understand like the NCAA point of view, but the way I look at it is, what harm is it, to help those guys, help those players? I know a lot of players that I came in with. Financially, it wasn't that great at home, and that little bit of money in their pocket is something that they could send home to their mom and their families. And I know, like from you get your FAFSA checks or you get your stipends. I know a lot of those guys didn't even see that because they sent that right home to their mom. I was one of those guys, so I see myself all over ESPN and stuff like that. I think it would have been very beneficial to not only myself but my family if I were able to, have some of that income in my pocket.
So Martin, I'll come to you. I know that you work at a fantastic institution. I can't remember where, but thanks for joining us here. You've been, like Stan, you're a Division I athlete. You've worked at a bunch of colleges, including Ohio State, before you came to Boston College. What are you hearing from your perspective, both as an athletic director in the ACC, as someone who cares deeply about the mission of an institution, and who has, 31 varsity sports? It's a broad scope that you've got to deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think that we're having healthy conversations and it's time for change. As Stan alluded to, I've been pleased to see the educational piece of this kind of come to the forefront because at the end of the day, our mission is to educate, develop, and teach. And I do think name, image, and likeness, it allows us an opportunity to help our student athletes learn and grow and develop in a way that they haven't been able to. You know, I look at this as an educational opportunity. You know, as far as your brand coming in and understanding what works and what doesn't. Maybe some of those lessons can be learned, and we can help facilitate that, but also bettering their situation too. I think that's a win-win. So I look at it from a standpoint that we're going to get there, and I think it's a positive thing. And you know, to Stan's point earlier, you know, it's like when you have a lot of people in the room with different opinions, it's hard to galvanize and get everybody to get on the same page when every school looks different. The opportunities look different, you know. And then there's also the education piece where a lot of our student athletes may not understand the impact. Some of our administrators don't understand the impact. I think we've come a long way now to where there's more education as far as what it looks like, what it could look like. But I think it's positive. I think this is an opportunity to really help young people grow and understand their brand, understand how they can monetize that, understand that maybe the market is not what they think it is. You know, I'll give an example. I talked to one of our teams about jersey sales, and you know, if a jersey sells for $60, how much do you think you would get from that? And you know, I was getting answers $40, $50, and then you start listing all the entities that gotta get their cut before you, and it's kind of an eye-opening thing. So again, this is an educational opportunity to help young people learn before they get professional and get to that real world.
And I think that's important, but I also think that the critics would say, and there's no doubt that I've been one over the years, that this is taking a long time. I testified in front of Congress in 2011 saying, okay, change is coming. We know change is coming to college athletics. There's lawsuits, there's legislators that are talking about this. And the hope was that the NCAA would come together, recognize that, have this meaningful exchange to talk about reform before the legal cases and the legislature put pressure and came up with a system for those of us who love college athletics that none of us would find appealing. And that's the pressure that we're now finding, is we now have this clock that's ticking. And what happens if the college athletes in Florida have the rights to their names, image, and likeness under state legislature this fall? And so I think that's been one of the critiques, but it's clear that the devil's going to be in the details, trying to figure out what does it actually look like. And when you talk about what Saquon's mentioning, right, and you're mentioning on education, so names, image, and likeness rights come to college athletes this fall, next fall, soon. How are schools, conferences, the NCAA going to now pay attention to the role of agents, right? Because the players are now going to have the right, and at least the NCAA has mentioned that they're going to change some of their rules for access to agents earlier. What does that look like? When does recruitment of athletes to represent them for name, image, and likeness? Saquon, you're a high school All-American. Are you ready at your kitchen table as a junior to sit down and have a conversation with agents who want to represent you as you decide where to go and market your abilities? I think that's where we're heading, and that's where we're going to have a lot of friction, I guess, would be a statement.
Yeah, I'll comment on that without question. And the one thing that I think we have to also think about is that the term agent is when we speak of that, sometimes that's thought of as in a narrow way, in that we're talking about individuals that represent potential professional athletes, whereas agents is a very wide variety of individuals who are financial advisors, individuals who are brand managers, individuals who specialize in the social media space in getting individuals more and more clicks or more followers. So when we look at that issue as we try to incorporate this in the whole name, image, and likeness, we can't think of it in that narrow scope. We have to think of it wider. Because nowadays parents are agents. Parents are building their son or daughter's brand before they even get to college. So I suspect what we're going to be looking at. There are organizations and companies out there right now that actually specialize in this area, that specializes in making sure that they know what the market is, what the market rate is for an individual that has 110,000 followers on Instagram, or what it is for somebody to be an influencer in social media based upon the number of followers. There are individuals that specialize in that. There's also organizations that specialize in making transactions very transparent. And that is, very important with collegiate athletics, with the recruiting space. So as we move down this track, we're going to probably see organizations cropping up that are not just what we would call agents, but they're organizations that will make transactions happen, will bring together the people, the sponsors, along with the student athletes who have the ability to maybe make a deal with an agent, advertising agency, or or whatever. So at this point, I don't, or at least I hope, the NCAA is not going to look at trying to do that within house, because that is a huge undertaking, and the more that the NCAA gets involved in those types of things, one thing that our institutions have to be careful of is that we're not looking for our student athletes to be employees of the institution. And because once they become employees of the institution, then we're talking total different laws. We're talking employment laws. So we have to stay away from that. And in order to be able to stay away from that, some of this is going to have to be left open to the free market, and some of it will have to be educating the prospective student athletes coming in. Our student athletes, that's our business. We have to make sure that we're protecting them from an educational perspective, to make sure that they're making the right decisions in who is going to represent them and deal with them in this space.
So you mentioned a couple of things that I want to bring to Jerry and Saquon to get their thoughts, right? So there's two areas where name, image, and likeness, well, there's a lot of areas, but two sort of main areas. One is group licensing, right? And so, Saquon, you were very aware at some point that you couldn't play NCAA football 2017 with yourself as a player as a result of the NCAA's rules, right? So now, in theory, we're going to have that ability for all of the college athletes to get group licenses so that EA Sports can come back at the college level. Are there thoughts, and I know, Jerry, that you guys are thinking about who's negotiating on behalf of these athletes for those rights? Because you have the ability as an individual, you're an elite athlete, you're an All-American, there may be a local company, a national company that wants to have you represent them individually, but there's also this group licensing impact that will affect all of the athletes. So Jerry, what are your plans to do that? And then I'll come to Saquon to get a sense of how that would work from your perspective.
Look, again, I need to reset the conversation a little bit, because what I'm finding is that everybody at the pro level and at the college level, everybody's jumping into this conversation from the existing constructs. And what I'm trying to say is that I think people got to slow down. Obviously, in college, there's a lot more players in college than there are in the NFL. I've got 2,000 players that are constituents in the NFL with NFLPA, and I've got 1,500 constituents in baseball. Our new company, One Team, is anchored by the NFLPA and MLBPA. But what we're finding is that, and I'm finding this also in college, that once you get to the college level, it immediately goes to name, image, and likeness on an individual level. And that's when you start to talk about agents and you start to talk about individuals. And in sports, it's the same thing in Hollywood. I mean, there's the 1% and then there's the 99%, right? In Hollywood, you've got Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise, and then the other 99% are waiting tables, basically. In sports, you've got the breakout stars, but then you can't have a game or a team. It's the same concept unless you have a team, and it's everybody. And I think what we should be focused on, certainly at the pro level, and then also I think it even applies more to the college level, because college is more complicated, frankly, than the pros. I think we got to look at the collective. And so rather than get into these immediate discussions on NIL with regards to the individuals and agents and what does that mean, and then it seems like it's just completely out of control, I think with the starting point in the conversation has to be the collective grouping. And I have to believe Let me I'll state something on the pro level that we're finding. Now, look, we're 2 minutes into this, but on the pro level, what we're finding is that our whole investment thesis is predicated around group licensing for all of the players, and it's anchored by two verticals: video games and trading cards. And what we're finding is that if we can find a way to partner with the other 2/3 of the value chain that I talked about, there's a chance to actually grow that pie. Now, what you do with that incremental pie is then the next iteration in the discussion. So I would submit to you that, in college, there has to be everyone has to pretty much get around and agree that if you could grow the pie, the media pie, the sponsorship pie, the ticketing pie, by having the players participate with the conferences and with the league, that's got to be a good thing. Then you can go talk about, well, how do we divvy it up and what does it mean for individuals, et cetera.
I agree, but here's the question. Who's representing the college athletes at the table when they're talking about growing the pie? Is it the athletic directors in the conferences that say, okay, you're part of us and we're gonna do this? I know that college athletes are not employees based on NLRB's quasi decision or punt at the DC district, but is there some recognition of we allow some union for group licensing for this, or a body that does it, whether it's Ramogi Huma at NCPA now? Like, Saquon, who do you think should be sitting at the table with you, or should the athletes be at the table representing themselves?
I mean, I definitely would say the athletes, but you also got to, get in the mindset that we are college athletes and we have a lot on our plate and a lot on our table. So it kind of comes back to, a topic that keeps getting brought up is education, educating those guys. And we can't just go up there just what we see on social media or how we feel. You got to go and do your own research and educate yourself. And then if the NCAA or athletic directors and your coaches help you out, we will be able to go up to that table and, represent ourselves the right way. So I think that this kind of same way where it is with the CBA and NFL, having your players and having player reps. But obviously that's way along down the line, and we have to have the right people in place and make sure we have the right education system in place for us to be able to do that.
Stan,
I'd like to add into this. So over the years, we've looked at the NCAA structure. What we've done is, the NCAA is a very bureaucratic machine, but we recognize that we have to have all the various different constituencies within collegiate athletics at the table when making new rules changes. So I want to say it was back in 1990, 91, we created. Back then, we realized that we weren't hearing the student-athlete voice when we voted on legislation. We created a National Student-Athlete Advisory Committee. And then that has expanded over the years from the National Student-Athlete Advisory Committee to conference student-athlete advisory committees, and every institution has student-athlete advisory committees on their campus. So we figured out a way of making sure that all student athletes had a say in how our rules would change, and we needed their voice. We have to have their voice. I think we're up to that point again, where, as you say, we got to figure out, well, what is that legal construct to allow student athletes to be able to be represented if they decide that they want to go into group licensing. And that's one of the biggest issues right now that the various different committees are faced with, with talking about name, image, and likeness. But I do believe that there's a way in which we can create a student athlete, for lack of a better term, player association comprised of the SSAC groups that would be able to, in essence, represent the student athletes in any negotiations for group licensing. But I don't see that happening until after we get through that first phase, which is really going to be about the individual license.
And you're right, certainly the athletes have participated in advisory panels, but the framework in which those discussions are happening has changed, right?
Yes.
I mean, the framework was, you can't do any of this. Jeremy Bloom tried to change it, Ed O'Bannon tried to change it, and the NCAA had said, no, here's the framework, so we'll listen to you, but within this construct, and that's why the law and the legislature have come in and said, okay, this framework has some issues, right? And so I believe that the students have to be involved, but it's been external forces that have played a role in changing that a little bit. Martin, how are you going to educate the, what do we have, 800 athletes as they move, 750 athletes on campus? Because it's going to be different. We have a women's ice hockey team that has Olympic players on it. We've got football and, you know, huge range.
Yeah, well, with anything, you have to start with transparency. You know, you have to communicate. I mean, communicating transparency. You know, we try to send out articles. We try to, you just got to get in front of it and get in front of our teams and our student athletes to help them understand what's being talked about. You know, a lot of things that are going on right now is very fluid. You know, with change, there's uncertainty, but the only thing that you can control is how you communicate, and the most information you have, you try to share that. You know, like I said, there's a lot of student athletes and administrators even that don't really, haven't had their arms around this. And so the more as we move forward before the convention in January to educate and get in front of our teams and talk about what does it look like. You know, it's not just a YouTube channel. It's not just Instagram followers. There's so many things at the local and national level that this could be. So as it kind of the conversation matures, which it has, you know, it's an evolving thing. It's not, you know, we're not at a place right now where this is set and this is how it's going to be. You know, change doesn't happen that way. The way change happens is you continue to talk about it. Different aspects are brought to the table. You get more voices, you get more opinions, and student athletes are talking at the table now. You know, they're a part of the council now. They're a part of the conversations. So collectively, we have to get there together. That's the only way this is going to happen. It is going to happen, but you know, educating and communicating and being transparent with, you know, here's the deal. This is how professionals like Jerry see it. This is how student athletes see it. This is how administrators see it. This is how the NCAA sees it. And you know, just have those conversations, and we're doing that now.
I just will say that I think where you guys were going is something we should consider, which is, you know, the experience I've had in sports and then with the pros most recently is that it is going to require, I think where you were saying, other participants at the table in partnership with the players. And what I found on this most recent one-team experience with the league and the players' associations is that, you know, really credit really goes to the players' associations. They already had, they had structured themselves as the Players Association, and then they had Players Inc. So they had taken the step a while ago to separate out their business interests, and they had people that were working on solely the business interests, and they had people in the PAs who were working solely on the CBA type issues. And that gave us the framework to then take the next step. Next step was, well, who out there has capital and has business experience that can partner with us on the PI side at the table when we're thinking through these things? It's very difficult to sort of say to players, you know, just show up at a discussion on NIL and from a standing start. And so, and the key though is that, you know, the problem in today's world is, you know, there's so much capital everywhere that you've got to sort of step back and say, well, it can't just be the capital. Right? You have to look at the alignment, you know, do we share the same cultural values? Do we share the same, you know, prioritization on education and the things that we want to get done on the scholarship front? All of that stuff, again, particularly in college, even more so than the pros, there's got to be a whole other overlay to that. And that's where it gets tricky when you start getting into my world, right? Because my world's all about, you know, making a profit, but it has to bring other elements in there. So I would suggest that there has to be a seat at the table in partnership with the players.
Well,
you know,
yeah, and when you think about name, image, and likeness, there's two components to this, right? When you read and you hear what Mark Emmert said in front of Congress recently in January, talking about having guardrails to protect the athletes and the schools from anything that could potentially happen. But then you also have the other side where you think, okay, we have to work, we're concerned about outside influences, we'll call it, on guardrails and protecting our students. But then you also have to figure out, okay, if college athletes have the rights to their name, image, and likeness, how do we ensure that they're able to capitalize upon those rights as well? So you've got these two pressures, right? And so how does this, and maybe it's a learning experience, and we have to get there, but when you think about all of the change that has to happen, we've got this clock that's ticking that, I mean, there's a chance that a couple of the schools in the ACC, if the Florida legislation stays, supposed to take effect July 1. At the NCAA level, have you talked about sort of what does that look like if that law passes and is put into place this summer?
Sure, we have.
What would those conversations?
And I believe that there are more and more states now that are actually changing their effective dates to later.
Yes.
So that's encouraging, and we are very optimistic that we should be able to get a congressional bill in place that will preempt the state bills. If that doesn't occur and it doesn't happen, there's going to be really two options. Either you're going to have chaos because you're going to have certain states that have schools within the NCAA that are under different rules, and then collectively the question will be: will you allow those schools to participate in the championship events or not? That's one scenario, and the other scenario is the same thing that we're always been faced with over the years, and that is that we would then have to sue, bring a lawsuit against those states whose bills that go into effect prior to any preemptive congressional bill, and we believe that those state bills are unconstitutional, as it's not permitting free flow of individuals to be able to conduct business interstate within states, with interstate. So I think there's two outcomes there, but I think we're also obviously optimistic that we will be able to get some changes done legislatively within the NCAA by April of this year. It will be phase one, and then January 21 will be phase two. And I think as the states see the changes that will be made, that they will, continue to either move their bills back or repeal their bills.
And there's no doubt the architects of the California law intended a start date of 2023 intentionally,
Sure.
because they never wanted that law to actually take effect.
Correct.
It was an intent for pressure for people to come together, and to that extent, it's worked. I certainly want to take some questions from the audience. There's a bunch of good ones. I'll start with Martin, for you. Who's on your socks? And it's the best pair of socks that they've seen for the day, so I know that's...
It's my daughters.
Excellent.
Scarlett and Savannah.
Well done. Great questions. Let's turn... Clearly, these name, image, and likeness changes are going to have an impact on recruiting, right? What sort of impact, Saquon, you're evaluating a school both for your future as a football player, also for your development as a young man to learn. If name, image, and likeness was in effect during your recruiting process, would that have changed your evaluation, how you've approached it in any way?
Nah, not for me personally. The reason why I say that, obviously you go to school because you want to play football, but the reason why I chose Penn State, because I felt like that God, if it didn't work out for me, if I didn't make it to NFL, I feel like Penn State would give me the best opportunity for a career and for the rest of my life. So that wouldn't have played for a part of me. But everyone's different. But from my personal experience and what I believe in, I would have the same mindset no matter what.
How do you think it will, we mentioned sort of competitive landscape earlier. When name, image, and likeness is implemented at the college level, and every college athlete has that right, how do you think that will change recruiting at the college level in terms of, right now the Power Five get most of the athletes at some of the sports. Will there be shifts in that? Will there be opportunities for other schools to engage? How do you think it will change at the college level? Will it change at all? Martin, Stan, Jerry, any of you?
You can start, Stan.
I think it may change a little bit, but and when I say that, I'm speaking in terms of, again, when you choose an institution to go play collegiate athletics, you're choosing, if you do it the right way.
Agreed.
I'm going back to my recruiting days, my first decision, I didn't do it the right way. I chose a school because it was closer to home, because I had a girlfriend that I wanted to continue to see, and my parents just brought me this new car, and I thought I was going to be able to take it to school. But then when you step back and you do the adult thing, you have to look at what the graduation rates are at that institution. How has that coach graduated all his players? What kind of degree that institution really holds once you graduate and go on if you don't make it professionally, just like Saquon said. And then what kind of experience am I going to have? Am I going to have a great experience at that institution? You got to make decisions based on that. There are those that will make decisions on going to certain schools because they believe that they're going to be able to go there and maximize the most out of their name, image, and likeness. That's normal. I guess that's for some people because that's their priority. But I guess what I would also say is, if you're really just about the money side of it, you should be able to have opportunities to go to professional route. You should be able to go to the G League. You should be able to go to some semi-pro league, and that's where you should be going. You have to understand what the collegiate route is about, and if you are about getting your education, then name, image, and likeness benefits that should be way down the list on you, as far as your evaluation on what school you would go to. But I suspect there'll still be those that make that decision based on that.
Let me piggyback off that real quick. You're also talking about percentages. It'll change for some, but for most, that's not why you make the decision to spend the next 3, 4, 5 years of your life. So I think sometimes we get caught up in that this is going to impact everyone significantly. This is not going to impact everyone significantly.
And I think that's a good point, right? Because we haven't mentioned Title IX and we haven't mentioned the impact on women sports. And there are some that will argue that this actually may benefit, it's going to benefit everybody in some way. But here's an opportunity for the elite women's ice hockey players to go ahead and have a camp or to give lessons in ways that they couldn't before. So it's not just the Saquon Barkleys, the Zion Williamsons, that are going to come in and say, okay, I've got so many followers, and everyone's thinking about this huge deal with whatever company they want. There's this opportunity for that money to find its way in other ways that has been restricted previously. Jerry?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was struck when I first started to get up to speed on the college issue that this has been going on since 1995. And one of the first questions I asked my team was, well, what's been going on since 1995 that we haven't seen any evolution here? And I think what we should do on this whole thing, again, the conversation keeps reverting to NIL on an individual level. I think what we should really do is let's start with what we have right in front of us that could actually move this thing along, the first step in evolution. So look at the thing we just did with the pros. We got video games, we have trading cards. Why don't we sit down with the NCAA and say on an NIL basis, let's go look at video games and trading cards. It's incremental. It adds to the pie. It's not threatening to any existing constituents in their economic places. The great thing is that when I go in and have negotiations with video game makers, to your point on the women's side, we anchored this one team thing with the NFL, Major League Baseball, but we also proactively added women's soccer, women's NBA, and Major League Soccer, because when I'm at the table with one of the video game makers, I want to be representing all of those leagues. I want to represent all of those constituents. We can do the same thing with college. When I'm out negotiating our video game, and we basically own the Madden video game, I should be sitting down and talking about college. Now, the key is you can't do that in a vacuum. What we should be doing is partnering with the NCAA and saying, hey, do you guys find this of value? Here's what I think we can, and the starting point on this whole thing, let's add to the pie. And eventually, if you do that, you'll be amazed at the progress that you'll start to see then you can start to get into all of these other much more complicated issues at the college level about college players, their individual NIL, how does that relate to the whole, et cetera. But the starting point, you got to start somewhere. And the thing, as someone who comes from the private sector, I'm shocked that this thing's been going on since 1995, and here we are in 2020, and we're having the same conversation. So part of what I want to do is I don't want to be a catalyst for coming in guns blazing and uninformed. But I would say, the one thing that's really interesting. One of the things that I thought about is that at the pro level, when you look at football, maybe there's an interesting opportunity where we can start to look at vertically integrating the sport. So, if we're starting with the pros and we want to have discussions with college, why don't we go all the way down to Pop Warner and high school and talk about the benefits that the whole value chain in football can benefit from by virtue of these activities. You see what I'm saying? And so it's these things are complicated, and so it's clear that the obvious point is that it's really complicated, and there's a lot of constituents, but things get politicized. And the great thing about capital, it's the great depoliticizer, right? And so I would say one of the things that should be put on the table sooner rather than later is how do we? I think everybody on this stage would say, yes, we want to see something happen here. We want to see evolution. Okay, well, guess what? Capital's a great way to do that. It's got to be responsible capital. So let's go have a conversation about what's the first step that doesn't, politicize everything so that you're stuck in the old 1995 dialogue.
So we clearly have some incremental changes that are happening. We have a lot of mechanics that are going to need to be executed and thought through for name, image, and likeness to come the way we envision it at the college level. But let's go forward 5 or 10 years. Right? What does college athletics look like from this perspective in terms of compensation for athletes, maintaining the integrity of the educational component to this? What does college athletics look like in 5, 10 years? What are we talking about in Sloan at the SSAC 2030 within college athletics? Stan?
I don't think it looks very much different. Whenever we've had some major changes where it was such a big deal, whether it was going to the cost of attendance or whether it was allowing student athletes to be able to work, there was always this uproar of how it's going to change the recruiting. It's going to, further divide the haves and the have-nots. I suspect that we'll figure it out. It will be within the collegiate model, and we will go on just as we have been going on, and there will be additional benefits available for student athletes, and that has been always the goal is to make the student athlete experience the best experience it could possibly be, and to find ways in which you can improve upon that on an annual basis. That was my goal when I was on campus, when I was at a conference office, and now at the NCAA. And so I don't see that changing. We're just going to end up going to the next big issue that'll come after that, which I'm not sure, but I hope I'm retired by then and I'm out of it. But I think it looks pretty much the same.
But the understanding of this concept of amateurism has changed over the years, right?
I like to use the term collegiate model.
Okay. Collegiate model.
So the collegiate model is big enough to continue to expand. That's the way I would answer that question.
College athletics is about providing opportunities for young people to grow and develop and become what they want to be. And that's not going to change. Fundamentally, athletics is to support the mission of the institution, and that's education, and so this technology, improve upon that. To Stan's point about we always are trying to improve the student athlete experience. We try to learn from guys that leave, like Saquon, to learn what we could have done differently, what can we do better to enhance that. But at the end of the day, the mission is education. And so that doesn't change regardless of what these big hairy things that we've got to all come together to figure out. It's still trying to better the student athlete experience. That's what this is about. And so that's not going to change 5 to 10 years from now.
So you've got the experience now of making it to the next level. Looking back at your college career, how do you wish things had been different? Do you wish they had been different at all? Or was the process that played out for you exactly had you expected and something that you wouldn't change upon?
I don't think I would change anything, really. I think kind of going back to what he's saying, like there's that 1% and the 99%, and I've been very fortunate enough to probably be in that 1%. So would I change a little bit of it? Maybe, maybe not. I think, everything happened for a reason. I learned from it, and now I'm in NFL and living my dream, and I'm doing pretty well for myself. So I wouldn't really go back and change anything. One thing I do know is that, like, for that people who are in the 1%, I would love to go back and talk to some of those guys. I know NCAA holds like an event. I remember when I was going from my sophomore year to junior year, the people who was like projected to go to like the first round, the second round, there was like an event where we all would go and just listen. They'll try to educate us, and I would love to go back and talk, because when you are in that 1%, there's a lot of people, when you talk about agents, the financial advisors, the marketing, the managers, and so on and so on. There's a lot of people that's going to come, and you got to put the right people in position, because you got to have. You're not going to know how to negotiate a deal. You're not going to know how to do this and that and the third. You got to hire people for that. And when you hire those people, also hire people that's going to educate you too. And I think I've done a pretty good job with that so far with my team. And every single day I'm continuing to learn and learn. And hopefully we improve in the college space, and I can be, kind of a factor and kind of help in that area.
So Stan,
It sounds like Stan, he's going
Right, Stan,
to be
you
at the
give him a
next
call,
summit
bring him
this
back.
year. So
We could make that work.
commitments.
No problem. We just had it last week, as a matter of fact.
That's right.
The combines.
And I do think that college athletics, both NCAA conference and individual schools, have done a better job of helping the elite athletes prepare for that next level, to understand what that process is like, to maximize upon their potential, to provide insurance for those athletes to be covered in some ways. So there's no doubt that things have changed, and the NCAA has heard from their constituents over time as well. I know that the clock is winding down, so let me end with a thank you for the panelists for sharing their ideas, their perspectives on reform in college athletics and name, image, and likeness. Thank you to the audience for listening to us. We'll be available for questions, and thank you to MIT once again for pulling off such a fantastic conference. Have a great day.